Hello, everybody, and welcome to another session of the Geothermal Rising Student Committee podcast. Today, we have another amazing guest with us. He is Adrian Wiggins. He will share his experience on applying for jobs in the geothermal energy industry. We hope you like this session and find it useful. This session, I think it's really special for me because I met Adrian in Geothermal Rising Conference 2020 when it was online, and we were students at the time. And in a sense, I have seen him grow until now that he got a job in geothermal industry, and we will talk about that and share with you his trajectory. So, hi Adrian, how are you? Can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, Dominica. Thank you. Appreciate the warm welcome. So my background is I went to the University of Alabama for my bachelor's degrees in chemical engineering and geology, and then I stayed there for a master's in geology. And since then, I have accepted a position at Ormat where I'm working now. That's Ormat Technologies, and I'm a geology intern.
Thank you so much. So, when and how did you recognize that you have this passion for geothermal energy?
So it goes back pretty far. It's kind of a story with an evolution to it. Part of why I wanted to go to university in the first place was because I wanted to work with renewable energy. And that's why I chose chemical engineering as my original degree. And after some time taking classes in chemical engineering, I realized that I would probably be working in some kind of a factory, maybe making like solar cells or biodiesel or something like that if I wanted to do renewable energy. But that just didn't really fit with the lifestyle I wanted to live. And when I started taking geology classes, I realized that I really preferred the geologic curriculum and the idea that maybe I could travel and be outside for work and that kind of thing. But I was still pretty committed to finishing the engineering degree as well. So I was trying to figure out how I could best combine those skills. So I was doing a lot of research and trying to see like how geology played into renewable energy. And then I came across geothermal energy, which I felt like was a perfect fit for my skill set. And from that point forward, I started learning more about it over time. And eventually it developed into a big passion. And that's how I got here today.
Perfect. And the reason why you chose to do a master's degree was encouraged by the fact that you wanted to follow geothermal energy. Why did you choose to do a master's degree?
Sure. Yeah, that's right. So I really loved geology and I wanted to take more geology classes. And that was part of why I went to grad school for geology. And in that process, I talked to quite a few people that were in academia space for geothermal. And some of the feedback I got from them was that to get a job in the geothermal industry, because it's small, typically you'll need an advanced degree, either a master's or a PhD, but a master's is perfect for it. And there's a lot of different positions available out there. For geoscientists, sometimes people work as reservoir engineers or reservoir modelers, and it seems like those jobs might be easier to find. That's kind of what somebody was telling me when I was looking for grad schools. But to become an exploration geologist in geothermal can be a bit more competitive. So at the time, I didn't want to really like choose any specific path at that point. I just wanted to learn more about geothermal and learn more about geology and decide what path I wanted later on. And so I did my master's at Alabama on geothermal energy. And it was a project that was mostly computer modeling of a geothermal field that is operating in Western Turkey. And it was a really perfect opportunity for me because I already knew the department, I knew the professor, and it was a funded project. And I got to get hands-on in a computer space, basically, of modeling a geothermal field. So it gave me more skills and another set of tools to use to try and decide how I wanted to work with geothermal energy.
Okay, so in the period that you were a student and you had to do your research, you at the same time were thinking about your next step, like what are you going to work for or in which kind of setting.
That's right.
And I think that is crucial to have in mind. I think in my case, I lose track or I stopped thinking about the next step and I focused like really heavily in my research without thinking what will I going to do next. And that is the topic of this podcast because we want to share the next step, looking for jobs, doing the interviews, preparing a cover letter. And I think Adrian is a perfect person to talk about this. And so, Adrian, for you, how was your experience to get the position that you are now? Can you please share with us how was your process?
Sure. I would love to share. Yeah, so trying to apply for jobs and do grad school is a really hard balancing act. That's for sure. It almost feels like you're balancing plates that are spinning on a stick or something. You know, it's like it's a lot because you want to graduate on time, you want to do a good job at your research, but you also want to get a job, and you also want to do a good job at applying for the jobs, and it's just kind of a lot.
Exactly.
So also,
I'm sorry for
sure,
interrupting you, but
no worries.
I was reading the other time and actually looking for jobs is a job. It's a lot of planning.
Yeah, it is. So part of how I tackled that was I kind of found some time in my schedule where I knew I didn't have any teaching responsibilities, or otherwise it was maybe an open block in my schedule where I could work on some research or writing or something else. But I would choose to look for jobs and draft my resumes and cover letters and um, network with people on LinkedIn and that kind of thing. So I would block out maybe 2 to 4 hours every Friday in my schedule and shift towards looking for work.
Yeah, I remember we talked about this in the Geothermal Rising conference this year,
Hmm.
2022.
That's
And
right.
one thing that I remember was you describing your discipline. About balancing, that is really tough because also for me, for example, I was focused in my research, but also I have this feeling of I am leaving Michigan, Houghton. I have to take advantage of my friends and my time, and I found that time really difficult. So cover letters and applying for jobs. It's the first topic that I want to address first, and then we can talk about interviews. How was for you doing your cover letter and resume?
Sure. So I had never written a cover letter before when I started grad school. Like I had written kind of maybe a cover letter for the grad school position, but not for a job. So it's a little bit different. But University of Alabama's geology department really did a great job at preparing us for finding work after school. And we took a class, everybody has to take it if you're in the graduate program. It's called Communicating Geology. And the premise is that they teach us how to write as a scientist, and it also teaches us about peer review, which is crucial both in science and in industry. And they also taught us how to prepare professional documents, which included resumes, cover letters, and CVs. So one of the first assignments we got was to go online and find any job that we think we might want to do after we graduate. So this is like the first month of grad school. They're already having us think about what comes next. And that was when I found a position for ORMAT, for a staff geologist position. So I we had kind of a rubric on how to approach it, and then we wrote it, and let's see, we had it peer reviewed by two classmates. Then we revised it. Then we submitted it to our professor, in which case was the department chair for this course. Then we got it back from her, and then we revised it again. And then we submitted that for final grade. So right off the bat, I was already starting a cover letter and I had professional guidance on it. So that was extremely useful.
Okay. And what are your advices on doing the cover letter that you recommend for
Sure.
students?
Sure. So I prepared a little bit here, so I'm just gonna check on some notes. So when it comes to a cover letter, there's a few different components to it that you need to get straightened out. So the first part is the structure of it. It should be on one page, and it can be organized into kind of a 3-paragraph format. So the cover letter needs to be organized effectively on both a document scale and a sentence scale. So the first sentence, you must state your purpose clearly, like, dear Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so, whoever the HR recruiter is, I'm sending you this letter to apply for such and such position at this company, period. That's the first thing you want to say. And then you want to make that rest of that first paragraph at the beginning interesting. So somebody wants to keep reading it. Then the middle paragraph, which is kind of the body, you're going to go into detail and effectively deliver the promises that you've provided in the beginning paragraph. And then the last part offers closure and possibly a call to action, which is kind of like a signature area. So basically, you want to introduce yourself, explain why you're contacting somebody, explain what skills you have that are going to be important for you in this job. And then you're going to kind of summarize that at the end, talk about how that might be applied, and then suggest that they reach out to you, and for their convenience, you've attached your email and your phone number and that kind of thing. So that's just the structure.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's see. The language and the content is really important too. It's important to focus on the order of the words, the length of the words and the sentences, and use examples. So the examples are also key for interviews, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. However, for now, we'll just go ahead and say that the language must be clear, forthright, simple, and straightforward. And any specifics and details that you add, any examples, should really strongly support your message on why you'd be a good candidate at that company. Because you have to remember that your letter has to stand out in a stack of 100. Literally.
Exactly. And I think that what it was really confusing for me is not repeat the information that you're presenting in your resume. And sometimes that can be a tricky because you are doing a great job during your resume, and then you have to present a cover letter. It's okay to repeat information. How can you not be repetitive?
Right. So a resume kind of is a little bit of a different document because it's concise bits of information that explain what you did and what skills you learned at positions you've had and how long you've had those positions. And the cover letter gives you a chance to describe more specifically what you have done to solve challenges. So resumes can change too. I wouldn't put all of my experience on a resume for a technical geology position. There's no reason for me to put that I worked at a restaurant when I was a teenager on there. And even at this point, I might not put on my resume that I worked at an environmental consulting agency as an internship when I was in college or something, because now I have more experiences that fit on the resume that are more specific to geothermal. However, I can write in my cover letter how I have worked professionally as a team to prepare professional documents for a really important project that was, for example, funded by the EPA. I can put that specific information and talk about teamwork and some of these soft skills. I can give examples of soft skills that I've listed on my resume, but I don't have actually specified for the technical positions that I listed.
Okay, so you prepare a cover letter when you started your master's for the
Hmm.
position in ORMAP. That is the company that you actually are working right now.
Yeah.
That it was this cover letter that you did at the beginning, the one that you apply or that you presented for this position.
So so no, it's not the exact same document. That was the very start, and a lot of the content is the same. But the truth is that I revised that document over and over and over because I would get more experience as my thesis developed. I would have more to put on there that was more relevant, and more positions opened up. And I kept applying, even if I knew I wasn't going to graduate in time, maybe for what they were looking for. I still felt like it was good practice, just to get in there in the online program, fill out my application, and submit my resume. Because if you look at it this way, every time you do something, it's practice for a time you're going to do it again. So by the time I actually submitted my final cover letter to Ormat that got me the internship, it was my 11th draft of that document.
Okay. And I think we have to stress this point, the importance of having a goal and having something that is clear that you are following. Because if you are applying for all the jobs that are open and then you're using the same cover letter for all of them, I don't think, I think it's really time consuming. And also, if you're getting rejections like day and day and day and day, your motivation tends to get down. So you think that was important for you to have this goal in mind? How many jobs did you apply for?
Hmm. Well, so you're right, it is a lot of work to apply for a job and do the application and write the cover letter. So I wasn't just applying to every job out there. I applied to every job in geothermal that was posted that I felt like I was qualified for. Um, and I also applied to a couple other industries that are natural resources that utilize the skills I learned. So I think at the end of the day, actual job applications submitted, it was probably less than 10. I really tried hard to select jobs I really wanted, and then tried really hard to get interviews for those positions.
And these jobs that you apply for were within technical responsibilities or also STEM jobs?
They were all like STEM positions that require technical skills that I learned from my education.
Okay. And in the cover letter, how can you do a really good cover letter for a STEM position or a technical position, or it really doesn't have a difference?
Oh, I see. Yeah, so there's different kinds of cover letters out there, and you can find examples online, and I really encourage everyone out there to look into that. There are positions for or there's different kinds of cover letters. Like for example, if you were trying to work in some kind of a role in an arts industry or something, maybe the cover letter would look different. You can maybe add more color or graphics or something to that. But there is kind of a standard format when it comes to a technical position. And I personally don't know exact details there, but I just tended to follow what you would see for a technical STEM role.
Okay, that
Yeah.
makes sense. And I remember I have applied for only field positions and also for consulting positions. And I agree with you. You have to, I think one advice that is really good is to see the responsibilities of the job that you're applying for and try to match what experience you have and the responsibilities that the job is looking for. So there are specific words that you can exactly repeat in your cover letter. So your cover
Right.
letter can be outstanding.
That's so true. And some of the best ways to find that information, well, first of all, is the job posting. If you've got, when you find the job posting, you should tailor your cover letter and your resume to the job posting. If they're looking for certain skills, make sure those are on there. Also, uh, there's another way to go about it. You can find the company on LinkedIn and you can see which employees are working there. And it's possible to reach out to those employees, send them a message, and just say you're interested in the field and ask what they think the most important skills are to the position. And then if you truly feel like your skills match, should they choose to respond, they might not, but it doesn't hurt to ask.
Exactly.
If you feel like yeah, it doesn't hurt to ask. If it feels like your skills match, then definitely make sure you include those in the resume and the cover letter. And that's a great way to find out and also feel, confident if it's a job you really want.
Yes, ask and knocking doors, it's an important step. My personality is not so extrovert. I am more a shy person, I think. And talking and going and asking, I think that took me a lot of work on myself to try to look for these opportunities instead of waiting these opportunities came to me. And
Hmm.
one experience that I want to share is that when I started applying for jobs, I found this position for an environmental company that was looking for aptitudes that I had. However, I didn't spend much time doing my cover letter. I just used the cover letter that I had and changed a little bit and then submit that cover letter that I knew it was not perfectly done or done with my signature, that I knew that I made effort to do it. I knew that it was not a good cover letter. And anyway, I applied and I submitted that cover letter that was not really good. And the HR sent an email back to me and he was like, Domenica, I am reading this email for you because both graduated from Michigan Tech. So I have a connection with you in any regard. So I want to give you some advices for your cover letter because if you want to get jobs, you have to do a cover letter in this way. And of course, I feel really embarrassed.
It's awesome that the HR person from that company reached out to you and gave you feedback. Feedback is super crucial. And that kind of has me circling back now to when I mentioned peer review earlier. I would say just because I was in a class does not mean that that is the only reason I should have had my cover letter peer reviewed. I always, reread your cover letter when you're done and check for like spelling and grammar and punctuation, things like that. And then on top of that, check for content too. Make sure that you're really hitting all the bases. It's always good to draft any professional written document. I've even had professors tell me they draft emails. They'll write it, they'll do something else, they'll come back and they'll double check the email and send it. And so something as important as a cover letter, where sometimes you really do only get one shot, it's really important to make sure that you're giving it your all. Um,
Yeah, because it's really the first impression.
mhm.
And even if you don't get the job or if you don't get the interview, they are reading something with your name. That is
Hmm.
something that I wish I knew before. I didn't apply for that environmental job, and I regret that he sent back my cover letter saying that I didn't
Mm.
do a great job, that I knew at the beginning that it was not good. Okay, so I'm really happy for you to have this position in Ormat. So I wanted you please to share how was your timeline? When did you apply for this job? How many jobs you have in the middle or applying in the middle and interviews? And then how you actually get, because at the time that you get the offer for Ormat, you also get another offer, correct?
That's right.
Okay, so please can you share that with us?
Sure. Let's see. So, man, this was, I mean, like I mentioned, my first my start was my first month of grad school with my cover letter. That was in 2020, and I went to the Geothermal Rising conference virtually that year. And I ended up in a chat room with an executive from Ormat at a little networking event. And he was giving tips about like how the email addresses are formatted at Ormat. He was like, well, here's a hint. He was like, if you type it this way with so and so at ormat.com, he was like, that might be how our emails are. And I had that written down in a notebook for a long time. And I never really thought to like what I was going to do with that information, but I kind of had that in my back pocket. And some time went by. I didn't get the internship for the next summer. And then I went to Geothermal Rising in person last fall, 2021. That's where I met you.
No, we
And
met
there were a lot of people.
we met in Geothermal Rise in 2020 when it was online. I
That's
remember,
right.
yeah,
That's right.
you sent a message by LinkedIn, but it was a long
That's
one,
right. Yeah.
and I think that got me interested because like I was impressed by your lack of shyness. Like I couldn't do that. Yeah, you was like, okay, networking, let's network.
Yeah. Well, there's only so much time and so many resources, right? Like I was only in San Diego for 5 days or so. I had to make the most of it. But I was shy too, but I kind of forced myself to get out there, you know. Um, Met a few people at first and waiting in line for food and that kind of thing. And then
Oh,
eventually I'm hopping around to the different booths and
yes, I
um
remember that.
yeah.
I remember I was in line taking like pouring my soup, and the guy that was in front of me spilled the soup in my jacket, and I was like, oh my god, really embarrassed.
Wow. Yeah, I'm sure he was embarrassed too. That's rough.
So, Adrian, we were talking about your timeline and how was your whole journey until you get the job.
Yeah, that's right. So let's see. I think my um my first big move in terms of the timeline was I had reached out to an HR recruiter at Ormat and connected with him. And typically, that's a safe move with any job that you want to apply for because HR recruiters want to be connected with lots of people because they're trying to find the best person to fill the roles at their respective companies. So I was kind of already like on this person's radar and I had messaged him. Um, and then a little while later, so now it's maybe December of last year, so about 10 months ago, I saw a repost from the HR guy about a geochemistry position that had opened up. The geochemistry manager had posted it. So I messaged the geochemistry manager on LinkedIn and talked to him. I said, "Hey, maybe I'd be a good fit for this. Let's talk about the skill set." So we had a phone call, and it turned out that he needed somebody sooner than I was graduating, and he wanted somebody who really had done some field geochemistry before. So it wasn't quite a perfect fit, but he was enthusiastic and he said, "Hey, well, maybe you would be a better fit for another role." So then he took my resume and he sent my information to the reservoir modeler. And then the reservoir modeler reached out to me and said, "Hey, we have these internships opening up. And also, I saw that you've written this research paper from when you were an undergrad on geothermal. So maybe I could take a look at that." So I sent him the research paper and he thought it was all right. I guess, we didn't really talk about it much, but it's out there. And then I didn't really hear anything for a little while. So I reached back out to him. I said, "Hey, I noticed that I didn't get the reservoir engineering internship. That's fine." I was like just curious, like how could I improve in the future? Well, it turned out they were looking for a little bit of a different skill set than what I had. So they were looking for people who do numerical modeling and people whose masters were really heavily involved in this. Um, he said, "You know what? I bet you'd be a really good fit for the geology intern position." So he said to just keep my eyes open for whenever that posted. So at this point, I circled back and I reached back out to the HR guy and I said, "Hey, I've been in touch with so and so and so and so from Ormat. Just curious if we could have a like a chat about any geology intern positions opening and maybe what you think about that." And that was a huge step because he scheduled a phone screening with me. So I think it was around February last year I had my first phone screening with Ormat, like officially. And this was where I had the opportunity to ask questions about the company and what the company culture was like and really feel out if it is a good place to work, whether or not like it's something I really want to do. I don't want to work for, I wouldn't want to work for a company that's not a good fit for me. And anyway, the call went really well. I got to talk about my skill set and my experiences and how I thought they would make me a good candidate. And then he told me that he didn't know when the geology intern position was going to post. He says that's not something I can determine. That's something that like higher up in the company they determine based off of other things that are out of my control. So um, I just kind of accepted that because that's how it is. But it was a really good phone call, and so then I just kind of kept my eyes peeled. And this is where a really good tool I'd recommend to anybody looking for a job to use is on LinkedIn. You can actually set up job alerts, like notifications for keywords. Like I typed in geothermal and geologist and engineer, all these different things that I felt like my skills matched for. And every time a geothermal job pops up, even to this day, I still get a notification from LinkedIn, and every week it refreshes. Um, so I get email notifications and in the app. So I think around maybe like the late March or April, the geology intern position finally opened up. So I had ample time to fix up my cover letter and my resume, which now were really tailored to the position because I had made it through most of my research. I was writing up my thesis, and I was able to talk about my geothermal work in the context of my thesis and how I could apply that at the job. Um, so in the meantime, though, I also had applied to another geothermal power provider, and I got an interview, I think in late March as well. So before the geology intern position opened up, I had an interview for a full-time staff geologist position for a different company. That interview was my first like big interview of my whole interview cycle, and I thought it went pretty well, but I did make a few crucial mistakes there. So I did not talk enough about my experiences and how I solve problems. I think the key to nailing an interview is to talk about how you've actually solved something and what skills you used and how you got from point A to point B. If you just say, yes, I can do that to every question, it's not going to convince the interviewer. And so while I did not get a job offer from that company, I did get really good feedback from the interviewer about some technical information in geothermal. At the time, I wasn't quite familiar with how geochemistry was relevant for exploration in the geothermal exploration world. And he gave me some really good pointers for it. So then I knew I needed to learn more and make myself a better candidate for the next company. So actually, having interviewed a different company prepared me really well for the interview at Ormat, which I still wasn't even certain was happening yet. So fast forward a little bit, I had reached out to a couple other industries. I had some interviews with oil and gas. I had some interviews with gold mining, and I had started communications with a geothermal services provider. And then out of nowhere, I get a phone call from, actually, it wasn't out of nowhere. Here, let me back up a little bit. I had reached out. I remember the old email trick. It's first letter, first name, last name at ormat.com. You didn't hear it from me. And just kidding. You can use that. And so so I had reached out to the HR guy. I actually didn't have his email yet, but I said, you know what? I don't think anybody else has his last name out there. It's pretty unique. So I just went for it, just kind of cold called him on email and said, hey, by the way, how is this looking? Like any info? I've submitted my application a few weeks ago. What's going on? Sure enough, a few days later, I get a phone call from him and he says, hey, I know this is last minute, but I wanted to schedule an interview with you this week. Well, I was about to leave, going on a little vacation because I just finished grad school. And I was like, well, I'm leaving on Wednesday. Like, I don't know what to tell you. He says, okay, we can do it today or tomorrow. I'll get back to you ASAP. And in a couple days time span, I went from not knowing anything to having an interview. And that's as much time as I had to prepare for it, right? Except I'd actually been preparing the whole time. I wasn't waiting until the last minute to prepare. And then I had the interview, and I really feel like I did great on it. I was able to explain my master's research and how I think it would apply to geothermal exploration. And then I didn't really hear anything again for another month.
Oh
At
my
this
God.
point, I was teaching field camp, like the geology field course as a TA for Alabama, in the month of June. So I wasn't really, too worried about what was going on because I was camping in the desert and trying to, teach people how to map. And in the last week of field camp, I got a LinkedIn message from the interviewer at Ormat, and he informed me that I was a top candidate and that they were wondering if I was still available. So at this point, um, it was my turn to tell them I needed some more time to think about it because I had another interview that had been set up with the geothermal services provider that I mentioned earlier. Um, so all in all, they were willing to wait and give me a couple more weeks to decide and have my other interview. And at the end of the day, I decided that I wanted to be an exploration geologist. That was the position I took, and that's how I landed as an intern. And sure, it's not a full-time job, but being an intern at a company like Ormat is a huge, huge benefit to my professional development because I'm working with industry professionals who are experts in geophysics and geochemistry and geology. And I've had the opportunity to do field work in all three of those categories already. I've been there for 3 months, and I'm putting together a greenfield development report for a prospect and doing my own mapping and all kinds of things.
Of course,
So,
what
yeah,
I want to highlight in this story is, first of all, planning is the priority here. And also networking, uh, don't hesitate to ask for feedback, to talk to people, the HR for the company that you want to be involved in, and also patience, because you apply for this job that is your dream job, and then you have to wait a month and 2 months, and in the meantime, you keep applying, and then you eventually have an offer for this geothermal services provider.
that's right.
You got an offer from them, but also an offer for the company of your dreams that made you wait a lot of time. So I think
Yeah,
um, that I want to ask, how did you deal with waiting? Because you actually are putting yourself on hold, and all your decisions that should I prepare my staff to leave, because you had to move states, correct? To go to
that's
Nevada.
right.
There are
Hmm.
many decisions that you have to uh, put on hold because you're waiting for that response. How did you deal with that?
Yeah, it was a little bit stressful at times because I knew I needed to finish paying my rent at Alabama and I needed money to move across the country and all these different things. And so that it's I just tried to look for opportunities where I could. Um, I applied to be the teaching assistant for field camp late in the spring semester. And that was something I wasn't originally planning to do, but I realized that would also be some good experience and it was enough money to cover my rent for the last couple months in the summer. So it would at least buy me some more time to wait and hear back from some of the companies. You know, in any time in my life where things have been really stressful and uncertain, like there was a time when I didn't know which grad school I was going to. I applied to other places besides Alabama. Um, there's a lot of things that are out of your control, and it's really hard, but it's kind of a mental effort to just understand it's out of your control and just do everything that you know you can do, and just kind of let everything go the way it goes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I remember when we met in this year's Geothermal Rising conference, I was talking to you saying, yeah, I submitted my application, but I haven't heard back, and it's been weeks and weeks. And you told
Hmm.
me, like, do not think immediately that you are not a good candidate. They may have problems, they may be with COVID or something, like, and why you are not reaching out from your side and ask what happened with my application. I think that
That's
is
right.
really good advice that I am thankful for. Thank you, Adrian, because that's
You're
true.
welcome.
Like, I think one tends to think that immediately you are the responsible of your rejections. Of course, you have a big component of responsibility because it's your responsibility to prepare your profile as much as you can. But again, there is a point that things are out of your control, and it's a mental effort, and
Hmm.
do not give up, and
Yeah.
keep looking for options out there.
Yeah, that's right. And I was feeling the exact same way as you. So the reason I know that is I had that advice for you is because I had just gone through the same thing back in March when I had applied to the other geothermal power provider and had the interview. I didn't hear back from them for a couple of weeks, and I was under the impression it was going to be a fast turnaround because they really needed people. And so I think the general rule of thumb is you wait about 2 weeks, and then you can send a professional and polite email to the interviewer or the HR recruiter, just kind of asking what their timeline is and if anything has changed. And then hopefully that will solicit some kind of a response where they say, okay, either yes, we have decided to move on with another candidate, like sorry for not telling you sooner, or we're still deciding. And one huge thing is you always have to assume the best in people. You can't just assume that they're not calling you back right away because you're terrible. You have to assume that they're not calling you back right away because they're busy because they're trying to run a company. And even if you are the best candidate, you just have to be patient. So I learned that really early on in my application process. Of course, I did have the opportunity to teach field camp, which meant that I was super busy myself and didn't have internet connection half the time anyway. So definitely got my mind off things. But um, that being said, I learned the exact same thing that I told you at GRC the
Yeah,
hard way.
thank you,
So
Adrian.
you're
Okay,
welcome.
so let's talk about interviews now.
Sure.
Oh, interviews are stressful. I didn't get a job in my very first interview, and then I can reflect back, and I was not being myself. I think I prepared a character that was not even me. And in the interviews that I have had like later on, I just try, for example, that can be a silly mistake, but in my case works that my hair, I always want to have my hair like this and do not care about that when I right now doing my interviews, because if you prepare too much, then you will not feel comfortable. Then you will feel that you are not doing what you do. So in this sense, and stepping back from the technical part of geothermal industry, like as as a person that is looking for jobs, what are your advices for interviews?
Well, first, I definitely agree with you. I think being yourself is a huge part of nailing an interview because we're most comfortable when we're ourselves. And
Exactly,
being
and that
comfortable
is difficult.
is, yeah, it is. It's again, another balancing act. You don't want to be too casual. You still need to be professional in an interview. But I mean, I totally agree with what you're saying. That's actually the first thing I was going to say was be yourself. So nailed it. The next step is be professional. And let's see. I think so. In the interview, they're going to ask questions, and especially if you have a master's degree or something like that, they'll ask you what your thesis was on. So you definitely want to make sure you know front to back everything about your thesis. Like sometimes it's easy to forget if you've kind of shifted projects, but always good to review any big project you've done beforehand and know the methods because you need to explain how you did it, which shows that you're credible and that you do have the skills that you claim to have. Because ultimately, what you're trying to do at an interview is you're trying to like sell yourself kind of. You want to make yourself seem really valuable so the company wants to give you an offer over everybody else. So you just want to make yourself seem valuable. And for jobs that require technical skills, that's explaining how you use those skills and what problems you solved.
Exactly.
And right. And then the last thing I have to say about interviews is I always come to interviews with a few questions. Um, I want to know about the company and what the company culture is like. That's a really big deal to me. I don't want to work at a company where everybody is expected to work on salary from like 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. every day and weekends. Like that's just way too much. Like I want to, have a life on top of work. So that's always something I ask. And then on top of that, I also ask questions about how the interviewer thinks that my skills could be applied to the job to try and kind of um, like maybe um, formulate this idea that um, like my skills are indeed applicable to the job or something like that. But there's usually a few technical questions I have too. So like one example would be like, let's say a modeling program. Some people use Petrel in the oil industry. Some people use Leapfrog and geothermal and mining. So at the ORMAT interview, I'm sure I said, so how important do you think Leapfrog is to the job here? Because I had just explained how I use Leapfrog for my master's. So that was a good question to ask because the interviewer was able to consciously note, yeah, we use Leapfrog all the time here. So that's actually a great skill to have. And that made me feel confident and assured leaving the interview too.
I think also a good question to ask at the end of an interview is one that I applied in an interview and I think it went really well. That was how, as your position as a boss, can describe a success or like the candidate is being successful in this role. What are your expectations to describe successfulness as a successfulness candidate? Because that is something that you
Mm-hmm.
have to keep in mind, and you want to deliver results, and that means that you are doing great. And the response that I got was like, for me, successful, or like for me, a successful employee can be someone that in the first year, at the end of the first year, it's able to do by themselves a report without making mistakes. And I think that is a really good question also, because
Yeah.
then you are preparing of what your job will look like and how efficient, or like the responsibilities that you have to accomplish on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, knowing what happens daily. And if you do forget to ask that in an interview, it's always good to keep in mind you can reach out to those interviewers on LinkedIn or on their email with some follow-up questions too. Um, because sometimes interviews might run out of time as well. And that actually leads me to my next thought is that after an interview, it's always great to send a follow-up email, no matter what, thanking somebody for their time and saying that you enjoyed talking to them and that you're looking forward to hearing what they think.
Exactly. And also be prepared for questions, unexpected questions. I remember one of my first interviews, someone just asked me, like, tell me please, why did you choose geology? And of course, that is like an evident question, but that role was for a geothermal related job. And then they asked me, why did you choose geology? And I don't know why I felt really unprepared for that question, probably because I had like questions of geothermal or what my research was about, my technical skills, and not this general question. And I was like, I struggle. And of course, you can notice when someone got nervous, and getting that feeling that you didn't do your best is something that I also had to deal with. Afterwards, an interview, you can feel like, yeah, I conquered this. Or like, oh, I could done that way better.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. It's important to be like relaxed enough if you can to be aware that there might be some curveball questions. I've definitely received some of those as well. I was interviewing in person at one job, And I met almost everybody in the company and on site. And so I had some interesting one-on-one conversations with people, and they were asking me stuff that's like way kind of like out of what I expected for the realm of the job interview. And I really had to think on my feet. And there's a couple times where I had to be honest and say, like, honestly, I do not remember how I did that one project in school. That was like 2 or 3 years ago. It was during the pandemic. Like, not to make excuses, but I seriously just don't remember the details.
Exactly.
And then
And
that's acceptable. You can always say you don't know.
exactly. And that is the reason why they are working in what they are working, because they want to know more. They don't know all the answers. Adrian, why do you say when they ask you how you see yourself in 5 years?
So you want to know what I think
Like
or how I
when in
feel?
the when no 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 when in interviews, because that is a really popular question that the
Hmm.
recruiters say, how do you see yourself in 5 years or 10 years? That was a really big question for me to process at the beginning. I think right now I know the answer, but I want to know yours first.
I see. I think it depends kind of like on the job. I kind of use the context of which job I'm applying for and being interviewed for to answer that. Um, I when I was interviewed for an oil and gas position, they asked me that, and ultimately, I want to work in geothermal in a few years. That's what I want to do. But the job was for working on at oil rigs. So I mentioned that I in a few years I wanted to shift over to working on geothermal. But that didn't necessarily mean I didn't want to leave the company, because if they started providing services for geothermal rigs, then there'd be no reason for me to stop working at a rig service company. So like I said, like in the context of that interview, I kind of used it to my advantage.
Exactly. When I got asked that question, I think I direct the response like in a personal growth way. Like I'm not geologist anymore, and I think, and that is honest, that in 10 years, I think I think there is no time to do something that you don't like, and I think the time and the life has to taken advantage in all the possible ways. And right now, I am looking for a job that make me feel alive and complete and useful, and that I am doing something to change and to make impact. So in 10 years, I want to see myself happy in a Monday. Because oof, when I was doing this internship, it was Monday and everybody was with this face of, oh my God, it's Monday. I don't want to be here. Please, I want Friday again. And of course, I was in that line as well. But it's really depressing to see that in 10 years, I will be suffering because I have to work on a Monday. I want to be in a job that makes me forget about which day is, and I want to just gain skills. And right now, I may want to do modeling and do stats, but as my job it's going, I will acquire more expertise and aptitudes, and I might want to go to the field or something or geochemistry. You can at any point, and within the geothermal field, I see myself doing all the responsibilities that as I can learn. As much as I can learn, I will apply, not only in this branch, but expand myself more. And
Yeah.
that answer took me a lot of time to process and say, like, okay, what I want to be in 10 years.
Mm. Yeah,
Okay.
that's a good point. 10 years is a long way away.
Exactly. Many things can change.
So yeah, every time I enter any phase of my life that's different, well, I say anytime. This is something I started doing maybe a few years ago, but every time I enter a certain phase of my life, I try and set a goal or several goals for that phase. Like what do I want to have accomplished by the time this phase is over? So, um, let's see. I think When I started grad school, like those goals for me were I want to learn how to use GIS software. I want to learn coding, and I want to complete a geothermal thesis. Those are my three main goals. And I did all those things. So then my goals for after grad school, like what do I want to do next? Like that was I wanted to move to the Western US. I wanted to work in geothermal. And there's probably a third one that I'm forgetting all of a sudden, but that I mean, I don't write down a million things. I just pick a few that really matter a lot to me, and I try and knock those out. So, man, 10 years from now, I want to be an expert in geothermal, and I want to keep using physics, chemistry, math, computer science, and geology to solve technical problems. But we'll see where life takes me.
Congratulations, Adrian. You are inspiration for everybody. Okay,
Thanks.
so I think I have had a really good time with you, and I appreciate you sharing this time with us as well. And thank you. No, no, before closing this session, please, can you give the final advice for students that are just starting a master's program or trying to decide either if they pick grad school or not, like they are not with a clear mindset, please?
Um, yeah, so my final piece of advice then is to think ahead and remember why you're there in the first place. Grad school, people don't go to grad school because it's easy. It's going to get challenging and it will be stressful probably at times, probably a lot of the time. And remember that you're doing that because you set a goal and you want to achieve something. Like there's a whole reason you went to grad school in the first place. And don't forget that. And maybe that's why I wanted to apply to jobs every Friday. So I wouldn't forget why I was there. But set a goal and remember why you're there.
That is really important. Thank you so much, Adrian. Have a good night.
You're welcome. Yeah, thank you for having me, Dominica. It's my pleasure.